This episode of Brains on Games is about a roll and write game where you're trying to build the best restaurant. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we're going to talk about a roll and write game where you're trying to create the best restaurant. This is a game that was sent to me not too long ago by Daryl Chow, and it is a game called, appropriately enough, Wok and Roll. Now, we're not just going to talk about Wok and Roll. We're also going to look at, you might hear it rattling around when I pick it up, we're also going to look at the expansion, the Korean Wave. So Wok and Roll and the Korean Wave, this is a game that can be played by 1 to 5 players. So there are solo rules. You can play a game in 30 to 45 minutes or so, and it works for kids aged 10 and up. So it's perfect for some younger kids. Often I talk about games that are playable by teenagers, but this one is good for the younger ones too. Let's take a deeper look at Wok and Roll. Wok and Roll is a roll and write strategy game, and it's light to medium in terms of its complexity. It's one where there are different menu boards. With the expansion, there are a total of 4 different menu boards that vary in complexity from pretty straightforward to pretty challenging in terms of all the different options that you have that you can try out at your restaurant. This is a game where you're trying to earn taste points, and you do that by creating dishes, crossing off dishes and ingredients here on your menu boards. This is the simple board. This is the first game I played, of course, was on the simple board, and then you flip it over to the back and you get the expert menu. The expert menu has some extra options. There's a pantry in addition to the fridge, and we'll talk about what those things are. The biggest change is that the expert menu gives each player a unique recipe, a house special. So there are sort of unique player abilities here, and you'll deal out these little tiny cards that go on their board like this. And now that is a recipe. I should turn it the right way so that the rice isn't upside down. This is a recipe that only this player can create. Like I said, you're trying to earn the most points at the end of the game, and the game ends in the base version of the game. It ends when you've created one player has created 3 dishes. So the dishes would be filling in a group of boxes somewhere on the menu. With the expansion, there are some extra options, and you have to create 4 dishes before you reach the end of the game. So it might be a little bit longer. But there are some interesting wrinkles to the expansion that we'll talk about when we get to that part. You'll start by naming your restaurant. So, of course, there are these wipe-off markers that go on the wipe-off board. There's a spot here where you can name your restaurant. At the end, when you're totaling up the points, you can put your total points up here just to keep track of things. And as you go through the game, you're going to be circling parts of this menu and crossing things out. That's the right part of the roll and write. You've got a marker, you're writing things on your menu. Of course, the rolling part is that you've got these dice to roll. And I have to confess, I am absolutely clueless about roll and write games. I've seen so many of them have come out in the past couple of years since I started this channel, and they're interesting to me. I mean, I didn't really like Yahtzee that much, but there wasn't very much going on in Yahtzee. But things like this, and I think I talked about Roll and Cook, which is a free-to-play game, a print-and-play game that came out just around the time that I was starting the channel. But I haven't really looked at too many of these. I'm going to be a little bit like Conan O'Brien, the clueless gamer, trying to figure this thing out and explain it to you as we go. But of course, like I said, the rolling part of roll and write is you're rolling these dice, and the box comes with a little wok that you're rolling them into, which is appropriate for the Asian food that you're going to be making. Once you've named your restaurant, and if you're playing at the expert level, you've dealt out the house specials, you're going to roll these dice into your wok. You're going to hear it rattling around. And then you get to roll them again. You can roll these dice up to 3 times. So like Yahtzee and Dice Throne, which I talked about not too long ago, you can pick the faces that you want to keep, and then you continue rolling the rest. Now you'll notice that there are white dice and there are red dice here. There are 2 red ones. There's 6 dice in total. And the player who's rolling can use the red dice, but other players are going to use the ingredients, but they can only use the ones that are face up here on the white ones. So you might be, that does add a little bit of strategy. If you're the rolling player, maybe I don't want my opponent to get too many meat dishes done because they're getting close to finishing the meat dish on their menu. So maybe if I need meat, I'll keep it on the red die because then they can't use that one. Once you've done up to your 3 rolls, you take a look at the ingredients that are there and you try to put them together into these different dishes. So for example, if you get 2 rice dishes and a shrimp, you can cross off one of these boxes here and get a few extra points. When you're making the vegetarian and meat dishes, if you get 2 of these things side by side, you get an extra ingredient that you can add and use later on. So if I've managed to cross off this vegetable dish and this meat dish, now I can circle over here this extra rice because there's 2 half rice pictures in those boxes. So it's well organized. It's very clear what you're doing. Now later on, I've got a rice ingredient that I can use if that doesn't come up on one of the die faces that I roll or that my opponent rolls. You've also got here a little refrigerator that has 1 extra of each ingredient that you can use through the game. One other fun element, I think, to these menus is that you've got a face on these dice that is a recipe book. It sort of looks like it might be a refrigerator, but this is a recipe book, and that's going to allow you to do some special things. One of the things it can do, if you manage to get 2 of them, is that you can develop a skill. And that means that later on, if I do manage to roll 2 of those recipe books, then I would draw a little hex around that box here on my menu. And now this means next time a recipe book is rolled, well, even on the current turn, I can use it as a meat ingredient instead of a recipe book. So it allows some exchanges to occur. Down here are some, if you get 3 recipe books on a turn, then you can add some extra bonus points at the end. So since you've chosen to turn recipe books into potentially a meat ingredient, you could come down here maybe on a later turn if you get 3 of those recipe books and square off these bonus points that you'll get at the end of the game for each meat dish that you complete. So I've got 1 X on a meat dish over here, and that's going to give me 1 extra victory point at the end of the game. So you really are choosing how to use those recipe books and which spots you want to fill in on your board in order to maximize the number of points you're getting from your meals. In the first game that we played, everything was pretty tight. The top 2 players kind of ran away with it a little bit. We played a 3-player game, and the third player was maybe only 5 points behind, though, at the end. But I found it super helpful to, once I had, in fact, it was the vegetarian ingredients I was trying for because I had already completed a few things in this column over here because it only takes 2 of those broccoli dice in order to fill those things in. I chose to make the recipe book, the wild cards sort of recipe book to be able to convert that into broccoli. And then I squared off the broccoli bonus points at the end so that I'd get extra points for vegetarian dishes. And that allowed my points to really ramp up at the end of the game. Once you've played through enough turns and you've got several of these dishes crossed off, these groups are what's going to determine the end of the game. So I filled in 2 columns over here and one of these groups on the seafood side. That's the 3 dishes I've completed. That's going to mark the end of the game, and then players are going to start counting up their turns. And there's a little spot at the bottom of each column on the simple menu for you to record your points from that group, whether it's rice or noodles or vegetarian or meat dishes or the seafood here on the side. And it just makes it easy to see where everything is and to total up the points at the end of the game. And then, of course, the player with the most points wins. So what does the Korean Wave add to the base game of Wok and Roll? Well, first of all, I'm going to open up this menu. The menus are bigger, and you have to complete 4 dishes before you reach the end of the game. You've got a traditional menu, and you've got a modern menu here on the other side. The modern menu is the more advanced one, so you've got sort of simple and expert, but they call it traditional and modern. And I'll lay out this traditional menu here. I don't know how flat it's going to stay. These ones are a lot more colorful than the menus on the original game. You've got pictures of these actual dishes on here, and this is one of my favorite Korean dishes right over here, the bulgogi beef. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it definitely tastes good. You've got some extra options here as well. You can add some ingredients to your pantry and save things up. Here are your skills that you're going to be developing. But there's a new ingredient called kimchi, which is an important ingredient in Korean menus. And kimchi dishes here at the bottom are going to allow you to get a huge number of points. So usually you're getting 1 or 2, maybe 4 points for these different dishes. If you do a kimchi one, the first one that you do is giving you 7. And then if you do 2 of the same one, it's going to give you 9 points the second one. So the points will add up very quickly if you're able to get your hands on some kimchi. You also need kimchi in order to develop your skills. So you're going to be trying to fill in dishes that will give you that kimchi ingredient. For example, you may be able to see, I'll hold it up, maybe I'll hold it up under the little camera here, that there are some dishes when you fill them in, they'll allow you to add a kimchi here over on the left-hand side of your board. So you would circle this kimchi ingredient on the left-hand side of your board if you manage to fill in one of these boxes over here. In addition to the kimchi and some different ways, more complex ways, maybe more fun ways of earning points and organizing your board, another thing that the Korean Wave expansion adds is that if you're the first to complete to X off all of the spaces in one of these boxes on your board, you have a chance to earn some sort of a bonus. It might be an additional skill, it might be an extra pantry ingredient, it might be some extra victory points that you'll earn at the end of the game. And if I'm the first one to say complete these 3 noodle dishes, I'm going to trace over this little flower here. Everyone else has to exit off their board because now they can't earn it. One of the things that we really, really liked about the expansion was that if you turn it to the modern menu side, instead of just simple skills that you would trace that hexagon around, you have skill trees on this side of the game. So when you're earning these points with 2 kimchi or 2 recipe books plus 1 kimchi, then you're sort of tracing off this tree and your restaurant is developing in a particular area, and you're following a path. So you really have to have a plan when you're choosing these skills. And that for us made it super interesting. So I had my son, he was trying to get all of the noodle dishes. He was rolling as many noodles as possible. And what's nice here is that one of the skill options is the option of adding an extra ingredient of some kind on each of your turns. So he was able to give himself an extra noodle every time. And then, of course, the next thing he wanted to do was to earn the skill that would give him a bonus for each noodle dish that he was able to create. I was working this time around. I didn't do the vegetarian dishes when we played this version of the game. I followed the meat dishes, and maybe that's because I like that beef dish so much. But I followed the meat dishes, and what happened was we wound up tied at the end of the game. So we did manage to keep it really close. But each turn was interesting because each turn we were always getting something crossed off on our board. We were always earning points or ingredients. There was always something going on. We never had a turn where the dice were useless to us. And often, I think myself more than my son, because I recognized that it was a bit of a race, I was using my pantry ingredients almost as soon as I got them in order to make sure that I wasn't wasting any dice. And then we wound up with a tie game at the end. So we got to give each other a high five rather than lording it over one another once we finished up the game. So I am totally new. Well, I can't say totally new. The only roll and write game I've played is one that printed out the roll and cook sheet on just a regular sheet of paper, and I use my own dice to play that one. But this is this is a much more advanced roll and write game, and it's the only one that I've played other than Yahtzee and Roll and Cook. So that's my question for you this episode. What are other roll and write games that you really recommend, especially for parents to play with kids? If you've got some that are good for younger kids, I'd really love to know about them, because one of the things I like about these games is the fact that kids are practicing holding that marker and being very careful in the way they trace out information on this wipe off board. And that brings me to the skills that are being developed by playing this kind of game. So, of course, one of those skills is that pencil control ability, the ability to hold on to a marker like this and very carefully mark out things on your player board, but you're marking them out in an organized way. You do want to be careful that you don't make great big X's that are going to cross out information that you need to see underneath. There are some spots on this menu, some little tiny pictures of ingredients that you're going to be able to add to your fridge or your pantry when you cross off these boxes. You don't want to cross off the victory points that you're earning by crossing off the dishes. So you do have to be organized in your approach. You have to be accurate with the pencil control, and you have to be careful how you put things down. I mean, of course, it's a strategy game, and you're thinking ahead and planning ahead and figuring out how to budget those die faces in order to maximize the number of points. And planning and budgeting and tackling things in an organized, efficient way. Of course, those are all examples of executive functioning skills. And like most strategy games, this fits into that, it fits under that umbrella that you're exercising those executive functions, including the working memory of looking at all the different options, juggling information in memory as you consider all the different options for how are you going to spend those 6, 4, or 6 ingredients, depending on whether you rolled the dice or someone else did. How are you going to spend those in order to maximize those points? So you've got what's unique to the roll and write style of games. Maybe not totally unique, but certainly it's unique among many of the games that I play, is that you're holding this marker in your hand and you're carefully marking things off on your player board. Final thoughts about Wok and Roll and the Korean Wave. Well, I have to say, I love the menus on here. I especially love the Korean Wave menus with the very clear pictures of the different dishes that are named for you. And they're even written underneath in Korean. I assume it's Korean. I don't read Korean, but presumably this is Korean writing underneath the English names or translations of the different dishes. The addition of the skill trees. Look, this is a game where you're racing to fill in things in a certain way and trying to earn points. The restaurant theme is fun. The wok is fun. It's much more fun to roll your dice into a wok. It makes sense thematically rather than shaking them around in a cup. The wok is much quieter than shaking a cup of dice, as in Yahtzee. We really liked, all of the people who I played this game with really enjoyed the fact that every turn you're able to gain something. We never had a turn in this game that was useless to us. I mean, unlike Yahtzee, where, once you've crossed off a certain thing, if you roll that again, then you're stuck. You can't use that roll, and that's a little bit frustrating. Here, not only were you getting everything from every single roll of the dice, maybe not always the thing you wanted, but you're always getting something. Also, every player is involved in every roll because the rolling player gets to use the red dice, but everybody else uses the ingredients on the other dice. So it's perfect to keep everyone involved. The only downtime is if someone's having a really hard time choosing how to spend their dice. Otherwise, everyone's involved in every turn. We really like that. Like I said, we like the artwork on the menus. The addition of the skill trees, oh my goodness, it gave you so many choices and options in terms of the strategy that you were going to follow and when were you going to start filling those things in. And because it's a race, there was one game that we played where I didn't get to choose the bonus ingredient that you would get every roll because I could see that the game was almost at an end and I didn't think I was going to be able to get the other skill. So I wanted the victory point bonus instead. So just the racing to complete dishes, I mean, it does keep you on your toes and it is strategic and you're really thinking about where to put every single X on these player boards. Now, if there's a downside to that game, look, I really like just about everything about this game. The fact that there's 4 different options for difficulty, it makes it flexible and you can introduce new people to the game gradually. All of these things are great. The only downside that we found, the only complaint that any of the players that I played this game with had was that you have to be really careful not to wipe off your marks on these wipe off boards. When you're marking new ones, if you put your hand on your board, you might smear off something else. We sometimes had to go over information a second time if we somehow managed to rub against the board and wipe off the name of our restaurant. Even the fact that you're naming the restaurant was something that we like to do at the beginning of these games. But the wipe-off boards, I mean, necessarily you have to be able to wipe the information off, but it just means that you have to be extra careful not to accidentally wipe it off in the middle of a game. And that, in a nutshell, is Wok and Roll and the Korean Wave expansion. Thanks so much to Daryl Chow for sending this game my way. We really appreciated it. What a great introduction to sort of modern retail versions of roll and write games. The expansion added so much. We really like being able to play with both options. And so we really appreciate it. If you have any questions about Wok and Roll or the Korean Wave, if you have any comments, if you want to answer my question that I asked earlier about other similar kinds of games, you can leave them in the comments section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go, and the previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.